With a joyful shout, the protagonist burst into the room, announcing that the long-awaited alchemist had finally arrived, only to be met with a chilling silence. The crowd exchanged uneasy glances, but no one said a word, their collective despair casting a shadow over the boy's misplaced excitement. Suddenly, the sound of grinding teeth cut through the air as the master of the house, Urin snarled, questioning if an alchemist truly stood before him. The onlookers began to murmur, their whispers filled with dread as they predicted the inevitable downfall of the Mercadal family. Unfazed by the tension, the hero stood his ground, arguing that his father was wrong because the alchemist class possessed the most unique leveling system in existence. He boldly claimed his stats would eventually eclipse even the greatest swordmasters, but his father roared back, dismissing his claims as pathetic excuses. With a dismissive wave, the man declared that even a child knows alchemists are worthless in battle, while the rest of the room watched in deathly silence. Urin simply smirked, revealing he'd known about their supposed uselessness since birth. After all, this wasn't his first time playing this game. When a confused guest asked what he meant by game, the father irritably brushed it off, explaining that his son had been spouting nonsense since he could talk. Despite the boy's eccentricities, the results were undeniable, leaving the father to wonder if a mistake had been made before falling into a stunned silence. Attempting to shift the mood, the man noted that Urin was only 15 as he placed his hand on the ancient stone, officially confirming his status. The protagonist reminded the crowd that a status isn't just a random gift, but a divine blessing shaped by one's character, upbringing, and life path. Since lineage also dictates one's potential, the boy argued that he couldn't be blamed for the hand fate had dealt him. The man arched an eyebrow, preparing to deliver a harsh truth as he explained that while rare, anomalies do occur. He suggested that a person's deepest desires could manifest in their status, though Urin remained completely unfazed by the implication. Overcome with sudden rage, the father lunged at his son, his strike so powerful that the very floor beneath them began to tremble. Claiming the attack was merely a display of fatherly concern, the man looked down at the crater he'd created, only to see the hero calmly smiling back. Amidst the chaos, another young man stepped forward, raising his hand and demanding his own turn to undergo the rite of passage. The father pointed to the newcomer, bitterly identifying him as Imavnor, the son born to his concubine. Though always considered the weaker sibling in both academics and combat, the shift in the room's energy suggested that the family dynamic was about to change. The cloaked officiant presiding over the ceremony instructed the boy to place his hand upon the stone altar while the crowd held its breath. His father muttered that all his hopes rested on this child, while our protagonist simply yawned as a cry of congratulations rang out. Imavnur was ecstatic. He had just been granted the prestigious swordmaster class, and tears of joy welled in his eyes at the life-changing news. Their father froze for a second, stunned by the revelation, before a massive grin broke across his face as he boisterously praised his son for meeting his high expectations. As the audience erupted in applause, Imavnur turned toward Urin with a mocking laugh, convinced that the gap between their talents was now undeniable as he vowed to prove his superiority. The protagonist stood by in silence, knowing that while the swordmaster was a top-tier class, true power required more than just a title. Suddenly, Urin reached out and grabbed Imavnur by the chest. He thanked his brother and enthusiastically suggested they spar the next day, but their exchange was cut short by their father's booming voice announcing a final decree. He declared Imavnur the new head and heir of the Mercadal house, officially recognizing him as his legitimate son. The boy's face lit up with pride as he bowed in gratitude to his father. While our protagonist remained unfazed by the news, the atmosphere shifted when he felt his father's cold gaze, and a finger pointed directly at him. The man barked that Urin was no longer a member of the family, claiming that having an alchemist in the Mercadal house was an embarrassment he would no longer tolerate. Fuming with rage, the father ordered him to leave the premises immediately, leaving the protagonist momentarily stunned by the sudden exile. In the blink of an eye, he was physically tossed out of the manor, sending Urin tumbling head over heels down the stone steps. His father continued his tirade, warning him that he was forbidden from using the Mercadal name ever again before demandingly asking if he understood. Urin just scratched his head, wondering why his father harbored such a deep hatred for alchemists, just as things were getting interesting. As he looked back, he caught a glimpse of the maid through the closing doors. It was Lotta, the family housemaid, who had been watching the young man's disgrace very closely. However, there was no pity in her eyes, only pure contempt. She clicked her tongue dismissively before the heavy doors slammed shut, sealing his fate. After walking a safe distance from the estate, Urin realized that even the help had turned against him, but instead of despairing, he threw his arms up and cheered at his newfound freedom. He immediately pulled up his status window to inspect his stats, which confirmed he was a level 1 alchemist with basic skills across the board. He knew it was time to take things seriously. Though he'd planned to stay home a bit longer, he looked at his stats and laughed, realizing this world functioned exactly like a video game. Before being reincarnated into this realm, our hero was a hardcore gamer, completely obsessed with a virtual reality title called Fantasy Story. He vividly remembered every mechanic, from class selection and skill mastery to the complex strategies needed to take down the world's most powerful monsters. He had mastered every class available in the game, but no matter the path he chose, the outcome was always the same. As his power peaked, the thrill of battle faded into a dull, tedious routine. Out of all the roles, the alchemist was his absolute favorite. Surveying the area, he felt fortunate to have secured a basic set of tools, some gold, and most importantly, a handful of rare ore. These were the 10 cursed ores he'd managed to smuggle out using his father's connections. With only his processing skill at his disposal, he laid the ore upon a stump, knowing the time for transmutation had finally arrived. With a confident shout, Urin declared that the preparations were complete. A smirk played on his lips as he realized he was finally ready to put his master plan into motion. He intended to dominate this world using the specialized strategies he'd developed for the alchemist class, even while hampered by the realm's harshest restrictions. Bathing in the sunlight, he threw his arms wide, savoring the feeling of true freedom. Before long, smoke began to drift through the woods, a clear sign that his work was well underway. Scattered throughout the forest clearing were several massive piles of processed stone. Urin tore through the local goblins, their high-pitched squeals echoing with every strike. After finishing off his latest enemy, he wiped the sweat from his brow, surrounded by a mountain of defeated foes. Resting on a nearby stump, he noted how pathetic these demons actually were. Since he started his purge, not a single one had posed a threat. He opened his status window and was thrilled to see his skill points finally increasing. Just as he expected, his level remained frozen at level 1. This was the work of the Cursed Ring, a unique item that capped his level, and easily his favorite piece of gear from the game. The young man fiddled with the jewelry on his wrist, twisting the ring back and forth before sliding it back into place, carefully monitoring the shifts in his character stats. Analyzing the data, he confirmed that while the ring was equipped, his experience continued to pool behind the scenes. He knew that the wider the level gap between him and his enemies, the more power he would eventually reap. He decided to sacrifice a single unit of strength to boost his skill experience points even further. Standing over an exhausted demon, Urin let out a triumphant laugh, declaring that everything was unfolding exactly as he had envisioned. He spent the next few hours harvesting flame stones from the cliffs and gathering hard berries from the thicket. For a moment, he felt a strange presence watching him, but he quickly brushed it off as a trick of the light. Finally, he began synthesizing his materials, nodding with satisfaction as his first grenade was completed. This was his primary weapon, a deadly explosive crafted entirely from salvaged scrap. On the edge of the dark forest, a level 12 horned killer rabbit sat in hiding. These monsters were notorious for their extreme aggression, but before it could lunge, Urin launched a grenade directly at its head. A deafening explosion ripped through the air, vaporizing the beast instantly. Urin emerged from the brush, cheering at his victory. This was already his second kill of the day, his instincts guiding his aim the moment he heard a sound. However, as he turned around, he realized his maid had suddenly appeared, and he had already released another grenade. The girl shrieked in terror as the explosive hurtled straight toward her face. A high-pitched, panicked scream echoed throughout the forest. She stood there, trembling and confused by his reckless behavior. Urin scratched his head awkwardly as the girl broke into tears, asking how he could nearly kill his loyal servant. Sobbing into her handkerchief, she branded him a heartless sinner. Urin quickly explained that the pin was still in the grenade, meaning an explosion was impossible. However, this did little to soothe the girl's frayed nerves, leaving him to silently lament how much of a nuisance Lotta had become. He turned to her with a smug grin, mockingly asking if she'd come to fetch him on his father's orders. The maid slumped onto a nearby stump, shaking her head and muttering about the disappointment of men. Urin couldn't help but notice her increasingly toxic attitude. Shaking her head, she revealed she no longer served his household. She had hoped to secure a quiet life by staying in his favor, but now realized that was a massive mistake. Urin felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Memories of his brother flickered through his mind as he asked about the manor, but the girl's cold refusal to answer left him noting just how harsh she could be. Lotta had hoped to follow him to town but ended up completely lost, even asking if he intended to become a bandit. It was clear to Urin that the maid had absolutely no sense of direction. He explained that he was destined to be an alchemist, and when she asked what he was doing, he described his limited play strategy. The more he spoke, the more confused she became. Suddenly, a formidable opponent emerged, a level 32 bear armor. It was a massive beast with shell-like skin and terrifyingly long claws designed for a swift death. Realizing the alchemist was only level 1, Lotta watched in horror as he prepared to fight. He told her to stay back, but she whispered that this limited play was nothing short of a suicide mission. When the maid refused to help, he snapped that he hadn't asked for it. By now, he had already slaughtered dozens of horned killers, banking 28 skill points and unlocking the aiming skill. Urin focused, taking a deep breath and exhaling sharply as he felt the preparation was finally complete. Declaring the game had begun, he lunged from the brush directly at his foe. Urin landed right in front of the bear armor, catching the massive monster completely off guard. He expertly aimed his weapon, instantly weaving the necessary spells to activate it as the bear let out a deafening, blood-curdling roar. Though he gave ground as the beast lunged, Urin never halted his assault. From the bushes, Lotta cried out in despair, convinced this was pure insanity. The monster charged, obliterating everything in its path, but as it closed in, Urin remained calm. This was the crux of his limited play strategy, and he watched the enemy's every move. Urin knew his meticulous preparation was about to pay off. He had used his tools to dig a massive, hidden pitfall. He threw his arms wide as the beast plummeted into the trap with a resounding crash. Urin burst into triumphant laughter while the bear struggled in vain to escape. With a flourish, he unleashed a relentless barrage of 7 grenades. A series of thunderous explosions rocked the entire forest as the devices found their mark. The hero waited for the smoke to clear, wondering if the beast was finally dead, but a defiant roar echoed back. The monster was still clinging to life. As the beast roared desperately from the pit, Urin began to laugh uncontrollably, his manic energy filling the air. Watching from the shadows, Lotta was left absolutely speechless by the display. Staring down a beast immune to knives and grenades, Urin didn't panic. The impossible odds only made him laugh harder. In this chaotic moment, everything felt like a twisted game, and he quickly began processing materials using his level 1 aiming skill to sharpen his focus. Despite his low stats, he knew he had to pierce the bear's hide at its weakest point, manifesting a bow and a razor-sharp arrow in his hands. Drawing the string back, a manic grin spread across his face. The thrill of knowing a single mistake meant certain death was pure, unadulterated ecstasy. He loosed the arrow directly into the monster's eye, relishing the sound of its agonized roar as a dark joy washed over him. He lived for this rush, claiming his brain felt an unparalleled delight in the heat of a life-or-death struggle. The bear thrashed wildly in its trap, but Urin simply stepped forward and tossed a grenade toward its snarling maw, mockingly telling it to eat up. The explosive sailed through the air with lethal precision, landing perfectly inside the beast's gaping mouth. A thunderous blast followed, tearing the massive predator to pieces in an instant. Notifications flashed as he gained experience, but the cursed ring kept his level firmly locked at 1 as smoke cleared the battlefield. Urin paused, calculating the 27 skill points he'd earned, a haul that would have boosted him to level 28 if not for his cursed accessory. Surveying the aftermath, he realized it would be a total waste to leave such a high-tier kill behind to rot. He invested his SP into inventory and alchemy, opening a spatial portal and feeling a surge of satisfaction as the massive carcass vanished into it. Marveling at the convenience of his new skills, he didn't notice Rotten watching from the shadows, stunned that he had actually survived. She admitted she'd originally mistaken his game talk for a mental breakdown, but now she realized he might even be stronger than a swordmaster. Stunned by the sudden praise, Urin stood frozen with goosebumps, wondering if she was just trying to flatter him. Rotten told him not to worry, announcing her departure for the city since staying with a reckless alchemist was a one-way ticket to an early grave. She questioned how he could find such carnage arousing, calling his obsession with restricted low-level play truly bizarre. As she walked off, Rotten suggested that if a level 1 alchemist could slay a bear, he'd find plenty of lucrative work at the guild. Urin scratched his head, calling out to ask where she was heading, but she vanished into the distance without a word. In that moment, he realized the girl's concern was genuine, marking the first time someone truly tried to understand him. He shouted a sincere thank you to Lotta as she walked away. She paused for one last melancholic glance before disappearing into the dense forest with a brief farewell. Now alone, Urin pondered her warnings about the guild, realizing he desperately needed shelter and a way to survive. Unlike the games he played, survival here required actual work, and his growling stomach reminded him that life was exhausting. Near the fallen goblins, a strange creature appeared, a graceful, elegant being that seemed to be meticulously checking its surroundings. He possessed a cursed ring that locked a user's level at 1. A seemingly useless item he transformed into a tactical advantage. Calling it a game limitation exploit, he tested his strength on a small creature, obliterating it with his mental powers. It was a level 5 monster that resembled a foul-smelling marten. He noted that beasts rarely flee from those at their own level. After harvesting a bag of its pungent liquid, the stench was so revolting it made the young man scream in pure disgust. Knowing it was too late to leave the forest, he decided to stay put and used the foul liquid to mark his territory. As night fell, his hunger became unbearable, forcing the young man to search for his next meal. Urin skillfully skinned the creature and grilled it over hot stones with salt and herbs, turning the beast into a makeshift steak. The meat was surprisingly succulent and melted in his mouth, briefly making him homesick for the familiar flavors of Japan. He woke up the next morning stiff and sore, realizing his inexperience had led to a very uncomfortable night's sleep. His mood brightened when he discovered fresh tracks and claw marks, confirming a predator was nearby and it was time to hunt. He soon spotted a massive level 65 wolf. Using the stinking liquid as a lure, Urin watched from the shadows as it approached. He opened fire on the beast, confident that a wolf would be easier to handle than a humanoid since it lacked arms. The monster howled in agony as its eye was pierced, yet it continued to lash out blindly, relying on its instincts to survive. It scanned the area for its attacker, but with its nose overwhelmed by the stench, it was completely unable to track him. The wolf lunged, tearing through the undergrowth toward him. Urin smirked, realizing his clumsy movements had completely given away his position. He reached out to counter, but the beast seized the opening, slashing at him with its razor-sharp claws. The wolf stayed hot on his heels, tracking his every move. Urin kept sprinting, realizing he didn't have a window to counterattack as they tore down a narrow forest trail. To him, the thrill of these life-or-death limitations was what made the game great. Suddenly, he leaped straight off the edge of a steep cliff, with the wolf following right behind. But Urin was one step ahead. He grabbed a rope he'd prepared earlier, swinging safely back to the cliffside. He watched with satisfaction as the wolf fell right into his trap. Hanging from the rope, the young man peered down at the pathetic creature. The wolf dangled helplessly, looking utterly confused as it stared into the dark abyss below. After climbing down, Urin rushed over to the fallen beast. Surprisingly, its status hadn't updated yet, so he drew his dagger to finish the job once and for all. Moments later, the long-awaited notification finally appeared, and he was thrilled to see the massive amount of experience points he'd just racked up. Taking a moment to catch his breath, Urin tallied his kills. Having taken down over 20 monsters already, it was clear his calculated strategy was paying off perfectly. His combo of daggers, rocket stones, and inventory management was finally clicking, especially with his new quick-switch skill added to the mix. As he reviewed his stats, he realized that in this world, speed was the ultimate power. His processing and mixing skills had already jumped from level 1 to level 4. He collapsed onto the grass, laughing at the sheer adrenaline of it all. His heart was racing as he began plotting his next hunt and which weapon would be most effective. He basked in the sun for a moment, but quickly sprang back up, knowing time was a luxury he didn't have. The grueling struggle for survival demanded his constant focus. To take on even deadlier threats, he needed better materials. While scouting the path, he spotted his next mark, a level 10 poison frog, famous for its lethal toxins. Urin watched the creature intently, a dark smile playing on his lips. He decided right then that its deadly venom would be his next primary resource. Now armed with a bow, Urin unleashed a relentless barrage of arrows. One by one, the poisonous frogs were picked off by his precision fire. He knew better than to underestimate them just because of their low level. A single drop of their poison could be a death sentence. Keeping his distance was key as he aimed for their vitals. After clearing the area, he quickly used his inventory to harvest the fallen monster's remains. Just then, he spotted another frog camouflaged on a nearby branch. He drew his bow, confidently declaring that he'd found another victim. But disaster struck. He tripped, sending his bow flying as his arrow went wide. The frog seized the chance to pounce, and Urin let out a cry as the predator turned into the hunter. The beast lunged with lethal intent, dripping with corrosive fluid. Paralyzed by fear, the hero reacted at the last possible second, drawing his dagger to slice the creature mid-air. Gasping for air, the young man stared at his fallen foe, realizing his hand was now coated in a lethal, poisonous slime. His breath grew shallow as the gravity of his mistake began to sink in. Without immediate treatment, he'd be dead within hours. His entire arm was already in jeopardy. He considered searching the nearest village for an antidote, but knew he'd never make it in time. He regretted his lack of preparation, realizing these harsh restrictions were part of this world's brutal rules. Pushing through the searing pain, Urin pressed on, clutching his blackened arm until he stumbled upon a secluded cave. Hoping to find medicinal herbs inside, he entered, only to find the cave already occupied by a level 142 silver fox, a mythical creature capable of understanding human speech. Urin noticed the fox was badly wounded, its silver fur matted with blood from what looked like a brutal territory dispute. As the fox's sharp eyes locked onto him, a desperate plan formed in his mind. He slowly approached, offering the beast a high-stakes deal. He showed the fox his blackened, swollen hand and asked if it possessed poison resistance. If it did, he would heal its wounds in exchange for a way to cure himself. The fox remained stoic, but Urin pressed on, taking its silence as consent. He used his magic to conjure an advanced restorative elixir and offered it to the beast. Moments later, the fox's wounds vanished, its silver fur radiating with a soft, ethereal glow. Now it was time for the fox to return the favor. Urin produced a small syringe, telling the creature to remain still. Urin explained that he needed to inject it with a small dose of the frog's poison. It would be painful for a few hours, but he needed its blood to survive. By using his specialized mixing skill, he could synthesize a life-saving antidote from the fox's blood. As his hand continued to darken and swell, the hero hesitated. Doubt clouded his mind as he wondered what would happen if his gamble failed. As night began to fall, he gathered enough strength to start a small fire before collapsing onto the cold stone floor, lost in thought. The fox watched him from the shadows before slowly rising to its paws. It crept toward the sleeping man, sniffing him cautiously. Then, without warning, the fox opened its massive jaws directly over his head. In that moment, Urin realized his fatal error. He had treated this world like a convenient game where overexertion and consequences didn't exist. However, reality was a far cry from his expectations. He grumbled about how inconvenient and troublesome this new world truly was, his stomach growling in protest. In his mind, the game world was vastly superior. Suddenly, a voice called out, urging him to wake up. The hero bolted upright, drenched in a cold sweat, his eyes wide with lingering horror from his dream. He scanned his surroundings, disoriented, only to realize he was resting his head on a young girl's lap. She looked down at him and softly asked if he was finally awake. The girl mentioned she'd been waiting for him all this time and was bored out of her mind. A revelation that left the guy completely stunned. Our protagonist's jaw dropped when he realized the girl was completely naked. As she complained about nearly dying of boredom, he struggled to process who she even was, earning him a lecture on his rude behavior. She reminded him that they had spent the night together, but he had zero recollection of it. Scrambling away, he demanded to know her identity, only for her to smile and reveal she was the very same fox that had saved him the day before. Stunned into silence, he stared at her in disbelief, wondering if it was even possible for a monster to turn into a human. He tried to recall if this was some random hidden event from the game, but he couldn't be sure. The girl reached out, insisting they settle the matter quickly. She grabbed his palm and inspected it with intensity before suddenly shouting that this wasn't it, and delivering a sharp blow to the poor guy. Clutching her chest, she explained her true motive. She wanted to form a contract with him so they could fight side by side. Her eyes burned with a fierce, unwavering determination. The young man was blindsided by the proposal, but before he could object, he let out a startled shout. The girl took this as a sign the contract was sealed, claiming their bond was now something far more powerful than a mere sound. Terrified, the guy bolted out of the cave, screaming in confusion. If he actually signed that contract, his dream of a perfect solo playthrough would go right down the drain. He sprinted away clumsily, stumbling over his own feet and crashing through the dense underbrush in a desperate attempt to escape. Dragging himself out of the bushes, he realized just how out of shape he felt. He knew that hunting in this state would be a death sentence, but before he could catch his breath, he heard her voice right behind him. Realizing he couldn't shake her that easily, the panicked boy decided a tactical retreat was his only option. Seeing a merchant cart up ahead, he waved it down, desperate for a ride. Sometime later, Urin arrived in the bustling city, scratching his head as he took in the lively sights and sounds of civilization. He eventually found his way to the Adventurers Guild, though he still harbored doubts about joining. Inside, the hall was packed with seasoned warriors preparing for their next quests. A receptionist greeted him, asking how she could assist. Stepping up to the counter, the young man officially declared his intent to register as an adventurer. The girl nodded understandingly and handed him the necessary paperwork, instructing him to fill out his details on the spot. As he sat down to write, he realized he probably should have registered before heading out to hunt, though some part of him had resisted the idea. The receptionist then asked him to wait a moment while she processed the request. Finally, she handed him a guild card that shimmered with a brilliant, magical light, leaving our protagonist staring in awe at his new identity. She offered to explain the map's mechanics, noting that it served as a direct indicator of the user's current level. Ranks are determined by strength. Levels 1 to 9 are rank F, while 10 to 49 are rank E, and the map must be manually updated at the guild after every level up. Despite the detailed explanation, the protagonist didn't care since he was stuck at level 1. Wishing he could just skip the dialogue, he asked where to sell his loot. The receptionist pointed to the counter, and Urin immediately flooded the table with a massive bear and several predators, causing the entire room to erupt in screams. Stunned, she demanded to know how a level 1 novice could possibly take down such beasts, leaving him scrambling for a believable excuse. Thinking fast, he claimed the monsters were already wounded, and that he simply used his inventory skill to collect the remains. Though skeptical, she eventually accepted the story, though she worried that a combat-weak alchemist would struggle without a proper party to protect him. After pocketing his gold, the protagonist realized selling monsters was far more lucrative than questing, at least until he slammed right into a door being kicked open. A hulking man in heavy armor stepped through the guild entrance, immediately apologizing for the collision and checking to see if the newcomer was hurt. The warrior towered over him, asking if he was new. When Urin identified himself as an alchemist, the veteran gave him a look of pure confusion. He pointed out that it was merely a crafting profession, and urged the boy to switch to a combat class, though Urin was more focused on the man's intimidating aura. Gritting his teeth, Urin firmly rejected the advice, causing the embarrassed warrior to back off, while the MC decided to just ignore the old-timer's meddling. With a heavy bag of gold in hand, he headed out to secure an inn and supplies, eager to return to the forest and exploit the game's mechanics. However, his excitement was short-lived as he soon discovered that his bag was already empty, having vastly underestimated the high cost of living. With no other choice, he was forced to trudge back to the guild to secure more funds. Clearly desperate for cash, he slammed the massive carcass of a high-level wolf onto the counter and demanded an immediate appraisal. The receptionist nearly jumped out of her skin, staring in utter disbelief at the monstrous creature sitting on her desk. She couldn't fathom how a freshly minted adventurer could hunt a level 60 beast, but the MC remained completely oblivious to why she was so shocked. Just then, the same knight from before walked in, greeting the young man and noting that they seemed to be crossing paths quite often. Urin cursed his luck as the warrior inspected the loot, once again lecturing him on why an alchemist had no business being on the front lines. However, the knight's attention was suddenly drawn to the massive wolf carcass. He stopped in his tracks, peering closely before asking if this was indeed the legendary Big Claw wolf. The young man nodded, confirming the knight's suspicion. The man scratched his beard, muttering that it all made sense now, while the guild girl added that this was indeed the boy's prey, leaving the knight visibly stunned. He argued that such a monster was far beyond a solo rookie's reach, and demanded to know who was in the protagonist's party, as his intel mentioned nothing about a newcomer capable of slaying a big claw wolf. Caught between the intense stares of the knight and the receptionist, Urin panicked. Flashing a forced smile, he blurted out that he was in a party with a man named Bob, recalling a massive brute he had once seen. The knight froze at the mention of the name. Urin broke out in a cold sweat, fearing he had pushed his luck too far, and the two stood in a heavy, suffocating silence. Finally, the knight realized which Bob he was referring to, and conceded that such a man could certainly take down a big claw wolf. Urin silently thanked this mysterious Bob for unknowingly making his lie believable. The knight then called out for Bob to join them. To Urin's absolute horror, Bob actually stepped forward right there in the guild hall. A short but incredibly sturdy knight, who turned out to be the real Bob, approached the group and calmly asked old Jonas what he wanted. Jonas asked Bob point blank if it was true that he was in a party with the young man standing behind him. Urin and Bob locked eyes for a tense moment. Bob casually replied that he had never seen the kid before in his life, triggering yet another wave of awkward, crushing silence. As everyone turned their suspicious gaze toward Urin, the hero began to scramble for an excuse, claiming he simply found the monster dead in the forest and brought it in for the bounty, guessing it had just fallen off a cliff. Old man Jonas scratched his beard, pondering if such a stroke of pure luck was even possible. Meanwhile, the guild girl apologized to Urin for the sudden commotion. She had already pulled up his status window to monitor the situation. Having studied his data, the guild staff confirmed he was only level 1, concluding that Urin obviously hadn't killed the beast himself. They accepted the story that he simply scavenged it after a fall. Because of his low level, the details of his cursed bracelet remained hidden, and Urin carefully kept it out of sight. The man wondered how a level 1 could even transport the wolf, but the girl explained that Urin possessed an inventory skill. Jonas gasped in surprise and asked the hero to confirm it. Once Urin nodded, the old man decided he was willing to believe just about anything. With the confusion settled, the administrator moved forward with the exchange. She apologized for the long delay and handed him a heavy bag filled with gold. Upon feeling the weight of the coins, the young man beamed with pure joy. He was surprised to see Jonas still lingering, but the knight told him not to worry. Jonas assured him that with a rare skill like inventory, the hero would surely thrive, regardless of his class. The knight then realized he hadn't introduced himself. He was Jonas, a rank B adventurer at level 200. As a jewel sword master and the face of the guild, he told Urin to seek him out if he ever needed help. As Urin turned to leave, he mentally noted that at such a high level, Jonas was clearly a seasoned veteran, making his role as the guild's representative perfectly logical. Extending his hand, Urin introduced himself and expressed his pleasure at the meeting, promising to contact Jonas if he ever needed assistance. Privately, Urin decided that if his foes proved weak, he'd ignore the guild and play by his own rules. But for now, maintaining a friendly alliance was the smarter move. Later that evening, Jonas approached him with a proposition, asking if Urin would be interested in joining a specialized training program for new recruits. Jonas explained that several other rookies were already enrolled, promising it would be a great way to network. But while the old man beamed with excitement, Urin remained utterly unimpressed. Sensing the tension, Jonas asked what was wrong, only for Urin to flatly reject the offer. Even as the man tried to rephrase the invitation, the boy insisted on working alone. Jonas laughed, pointing out that soloing as an alchemist, a support class, was nearly impossible, causing Urin to tremble with rage before clapping his hands in defiance. Fuming, he stormed out of the guild hall while Jonas shouted for him to wait. Spotting a departing carriage, Urin sprinted toward it to make his escape. Urin hailed the driver, who was surprised to see him, and quickly hopped aboard. Jonas was left standing in the dust, watching the carriage disappear, completely bewildered by the outburst. As he rode away, Urin sat in a dark mood. He didn't care for networking or training. His only desire was to hunt down the strongest monsters he could find. He found the idea of beginner training insulting. He didn't need hand-holding, and the mere suggestion of it sent his blood boiling. The carriage continued its long journey into the wilderness until, without warning, Urin leaped from the moving vehicle. The elderly driver noted the damp ground from the recent rain and suggested Urin find a team before entering the forest, a suggestion that made the boy grit his teeth. Visions of Jonas's smiling face and persistent pestering flashed through his mind, but Urin stood firm. He was going in solo. Navigating the dense, overgrown brush, Urin was watched by a horned rabbit. He noted the damp earth beneath his boots and realized he had finally reached his destination. Suddenly, Urin froze. His eyes widened as he stared at the clearing ahead, paralyzed by the sheer scale of what he saw. A massive, level 102, spider loomed over him, skittering across thick webs with terrifying speed. Urin cheered at finding his target, but quickly realized he'd just given away his position. He braced himself, knowing a level 100-plus monster was leagues beyond anything he'd faced before. Forcing himself to stay calm, Urin took a deep, steadying breath. Deciding to strike first, he prepared his specialized arrows and coated his gear in a lethal liquid. With a determined shout, he launched his opening volley. He utilized the toxin harvested from the frog, using his mixing skill to concentrate it into a deadly neurotoxin. Coating his arrows in the sludge, Urin smirked, ready for the hunt to begin. He knew from his research that giant spiders had a crippling weakness to poison. Suddenly, the beast fired a web shot directly at him, and he barely managed to dive out of the way. During the heat of battle, the giant spider launched a long-range web with the force of a cannon, anchoring it to the trees to swing toward its prey. The arachnid lunged with lethal intent, but Urin narrowly evaded the strike at the last second, rolling to the side to keep his distance. As the monster shrieked in frustration, our hero mocked its clumsy movements, knowing a single touch would be fatal despite his prior experience with this enemy type. To him, this was the ultimate high-stakes scenario. One wrong move against this sticky titan meant instant death, but he lived for this kind of pressure. A smirk crept across his face as he realized that struggling under such brutal constraints was exactly what captivated him. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the battlefield, scoring a direct hit and sending the shrieking beast tumbling into a cloud of thick smoke. Exhausted and gasping for air, the protagonist stood over his crippled foe, while the heroine watched on, unable to hide her distress. He watched the spider struggle to stay upright after 3 grueling hours of combat, lamenting that he could have ended this sooner if the poison had acted faster. Since the spider lacked the speed to escape, he prepared to outlast it, until the atmosphere suddenly shifted, freezing him in his tracks. Out of nowhere, a colossal level 285 dinosaur emerged, instantly crushing the spider between its massive bone-breaking jaws. This was an apex predator of legendary proportions, a creature that ruled the most dangerous corners of the world, leaving the young man paralyzed with awe. He couldn't wrap his head around how such a terrifying prehistoric beast had suddenly appeared in these woods. The spider he'd spent hours wearing down was now nothing more than a snack for this new level 285 monster, an opponent far beyond anything he'd ever faced. While a shiver of dread ran through Urin's body at the sight of such overwhelming power, a manic laugh began to escape his lips. Checking his inventory, he realized this chaotic turn of events was perfect. This was the exact challenge he needed to shatter his limits and start the real party. Facing down the massive jaws of the dinosaur, he recalled that while these beasts were common in fantasy lore, their raw power was no joke. He cursed himself for forgetting that games love to throw unexpected variables into the mix. Noticing the dinosaur seemed to view him as nothing more than a mere insect. Being only level 1, common sense dictated he should flee immediately rather than face such a beast without a party to back him up. But running was far too boring, so with a smirk, he drew his bow and let an arrow fly, piercing the dinosaur's hide and drawing its full, deadly attention. Betting on the beast's low poison resistance, he decided to turn this into a high-stakes game and stood his ground as the monster charged straight for him. Silently thanking the beast for its predictable movements, Urin lunged forward, sliding between its massive paws and directly beneath its colossal frame. He tried to drive his dagger into the beast's underbelly, but the blade barely grazed its hide. To his frustration, His current strength wasn't even enough to leave a scratch. Sensing the threat, the behemoth swung its massive tail in a lethal arc. The heavy blow was aimed with pinpoint precision, meant to crush the boy where he stood. Urin pushed forward, charging head-on toward his foe, but his footing suddenly gave way. For a split second, he couldn't process why he was losing his balance. He tumbled to the ground as his weapon slipped from his grasp. It was then he remembered the warnings about the recent rainfall making the terrain treacherous. He was sent flying into the dense thicket, landing with a bone-jarring thud. A sharp cry of pain escaped his lungs as the impact rattled his entire body. The dinosaur stood still, looming over its fallen prey. When Urin finally pried his eyes open, he was shocked to find himself alive, unaware that the tail had only delivered a glancing blow. The beast's gaze remained fixed on him, but Urin's vision was a blurred mess. Shaking violently as he struggled to stand, the cold reality of his impending death finally set in. With the monster's massive snout inches from his face, Urin broke into a fit of coughing, his mind spiraling as he lost his grip on the situation. Adrenaline surged through his veins, drowning out his fear. Instead of despair, Urin felt a twisted sense of gratitude for this life-or-death struggle, and a manic grin spread across his face. He pulled himself up, muttering that a simple "thank you" wasn't enough for such an exhilarating experience, before breaking into a fit of hysterical laughter. He tried to rationalize a way out, but the laughter wouldn't stop, even as he realized he had no plan at all. In that moment, he decided that survival didn't need a strategy. It just needed action. He figured the key was simple. Don't get hit. If he could just keep dodging and land the occasional counterattack, no monster was truly invincible. The sheer thrill of the fight was intoxicating. He felt as if his entire life had led to this singular, heart-pounding moment, his smile never fading. Suddenly, the dinosaur let out a deafening roar and charged. Urin tightened his grip on his weapon as the beast closed the distance with terrifying speed and ferocity. The monster's dark, predatory eyes locked onto him, but Urin didn't flinch. He simply stood his ground, weapon ready, welcoming the impending carnage. As the beast unhinged its massive jaws to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth, Urin's expression shifted, his gaze hardening with a newfound lethal determination. Suddenly, a thunderous bark echoed through the clearing, the sheer force of it nearly knocking him over. The dinosaur's lunge missed its mark, leaving Urin in a state of total shock. Before he could react, a massive fox snatched him by the scruff of his neck and hauled him away. Dazed and disoriented, Urin could barely process his sudden rescue. The giant fox sprinted away from the dinosaur with Urin dangling from its jaws. Without warning, it tossed him aside, sending him tumbling painfully into a patch of thorny brush. The fox scolded him, insisting he drink the healing potion she had prepared. Urin, already familiar with such tonics, watched as the fox transformed into a girl he had encountered before, then downed the medicine. Running a hand through her hair, she observed the young man closely. Her stunning outfit radiated an ethereal glow, and Urin couldn't hide his amazement at her luminous presence. The protagonist asked if their debts were finally settled and gestured for her to leave. Instead, the girl adamantly demanded he sign a contract with her, but he flatly refused. She immediately argued her worth, claiming her unique skills made her the ultimate partner for any contract. She was baffled by his rejection of such a perfect offer, but Urin explained that his refusal had nothing to do with her stats or efficiency. He clarified that he never intended to form contracts with monsters because he was playing in what he called limited mode. Stunned by the unfamiliar term, the girl froze as Urin sat down to explain that limited mode meant consciously imposing restrictions on himself. He explained that he was intentionally keeping himself in a weakened state. Shuddering at the thought, she asked why, and he simply replied that it made the challenge more fun. She wondered if everyone played this way, but Urin, remembering how a man named Rotten once called him an idiot, reiterated his preference for solo play and his strict self-imposed ban on contracts. Placing a hand on her chest, she interrupted him, arguing that even with a contract, he would still be technically alone. After all, she was a monster, not a fellow adventurer. She pointed out that even if they fought side by side, he would still be the only human adventurer in the party. She asked if that didn't perfectly align with his solo playstyle. Urin frowned in thought, rubbing his head as he explained that he wanted to defeat monsters using only his own power. He couldn't view her as a mere tool, so he wouldn't exploit her strength. The girl was visibly shaken by his words, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief at his perspective. The young man nodded and turned to leave, but she shouted after him, asking where he was going. Urin looked back and declared he was going to settle a score. She grabbed him from behind, frantically asking if he really planned to challenge that massive prehistoric beast again. She couldn't understand his recklessness, especially since she'd seen his stats. He was only level 1. Urin was caught off guard that his true level had already been exposed. Determined to stop him, she spread her arms wide and blocked his path. She boldly declared that she wouldn't let him pass. Urin stood frozen, irritated by her sudden interference. Since he had saved her life, she felt it was her duty to prevent him from walking into a death trap. Urin, however, just found her sense of obligation to be incredibly annoying. He told her straight up that he only saved her for his own gain and that her gratitude was nothing but a nuisance. He ordered her to move, but she stubbornly refused to budge. Irene weighed his options, realizing that arguing was futile after remembering how easily the girl had hauled him away in her beast form. Suddenly, a bold idea struck him. Pointing a finger directly at the beast girl, he declared that if she wanted to stay with him, she'd have to prove herself in a fight. Confused, she asked why they should battle. Irene countered that since she was a monster and he was human, a clash between them was only natural. She quickly clarified that she had no intention of a lethal duel, prompting a dark, confident grin to spread across Irene's face. Instantly activating his battle mode, his body turned pitch black as he focused entirely on the girl standing calmly in his path. The tip of his dagger lunged toward her face, but she didn't flinch, remaining completely motionless without a hint of aggression. He pressed the blade even closer, aiming right for her eye, yet her expression remained stoic. This utter indifference caught Irene off guard, his eyes narrowing in surprise. Backing away, he couldn't fathom why she hadn't even tried to dodge. She simply stood her ground, reiterating that she refused to fight him. Irene scratched his head, realizing that her passivity made this whole confrontation a waste of time as they lingered at the forest's edge. Done with the pointless chatter, he pushed through the thorny brush to ditch the beast girl, knowing that at level 1, the upcoming dinosaur fight would be brutal. However, the challenge only pushed him to develop new tactics. Slipping into the thickets, Irene decided to scout the area from the shadows. A smirk played on his lips as he confirmed he wasn't being followed. He was relieved the girl had seemingly abandoned her quest for a contract. He offered a silent apology, acknowledging that he was the type of person who preferred to face his trials alone. Returning to a familiar clearing, he searched for a specific spot. He knew his target was close, even without the exact coordinates. He was well aware that taking down a massive jawed dinosaur was a tall order, a feat usually reserved for those at much higher levels. But with his cursed ring capping him at level 1, traditional grinding wasn't an option. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He'd found it. Irene had discovered a magic stone. Though small, it pulsed with power, and he was thrilled that no other monster had claimed it yet. These stones were the lifeblood of every monster and served as the primary power source for artifacts, the same reason he'd hunted the giant spider. Checking his stats, he saw 48 SP banked from his previous kills. He immediately spent 4 points to master magic power management and energy. Reasoning that an alchemist is a master of their craft, he used his remaining SP to unlock a vital new skill: magic artifact creation. This new skill allowed him to craft magical artifacts, with magic stone processing being a vital component. Precision was key, so he carefully allocated his remaining SP to bolster his existing abilities. With his stats boosted, he set out to craft his first artifact using a magic stone and sticky thread harvested from a giant spider. He began the process by channeling his magic energy to analyze the materials. Since the skill was only at level 1, his analysis wasn't perfect. But that didn't matter much since he wasn't trying to invent a brand new spell from scratch. Wiping the sweat from his brow, the hero finally completed his work and collapsed to the ground in exhaustion. He quickly realized that even basic artifact crafting demanded a massive toll on his mana reserves. Despite the fatigue, he was thrilled with the result. Using his processing skill, he molded the materials into a sleek band, and thus, the string control ring was born. Urin slipped the ring onto his middle finger to check the fit. With a sudden flick of his wrist, he fired a web that struck a distant stone with pinpoint accuracy, leaving him marveling at its power. It was a magnificent tool, but he knew deep down that a simple ring wouldn't be enough to take down a massive dinosaur with crushing jaws. Yet, that challenge was exactly what he craved. A smirk played on his lips as he realized his true passion came from facing overwhelming odds, and he continued testing his new toy. With his preparations complete, the hero decided it was finally time to hunt down the prehistoric beast. The gargantuan monster, which towered over the local goblins like a mountain, was wandering nearby. The beast had already laid waste to several magical creatures who tried to defend their territory. Spotting the carnage through his binoculars, Urin whispered to himself that he'd finally found his target. He immediately opened fire, sinking several poisoned arrows deep into the dinosaur's hide. A successful hit was confirmed as the monster let out a piercing, agonized shriek. He knew the eyes were the most vulnerable spot for the toxin to take hold. But in the heat of the moment, the sheer scale of the monster had his adrenaline pumping. Our hero was well aware of the dinosaur's lethal arsenal, which included a devastating ramming attack, crushing leaps, and a bone-shattering tail whip. The beast was a specialist in close-quarters combat, fortunately lacking any long-range abilities like fire-breathing. However, despite its massive bulk, its leg strength was immense, making it surprisingly agile. From his knowledge of the game, he knew outrunning this thing would be nearly impossible. That's where his new ring came into play. He fired a web at the creature, and by channeling his magic through the thread, he launched himself into the air to dodge a lethal strike. He swiftly anchored the thread to a nearby tree, using the tension to slingshot himself around the battlefield at blinding speeds. While zipping through the air, he maintained a relentless barrage of poisonous arrows, peppering the dinosaur's thick hide. The massive beast shuddered under the assault, slowly but surely succumbing to the lethal toxins coursing through its veins. Our hero relentlessly peppers the titan with arrows, knowing his current stats mean the physical damage is negligible, but the stacking poison is another story. To supplement the slow-acting toxin, he plans to utilize a weapon that deals fixed damage regardless of his own low base attributes. He's confident that as long as he maintains this pressure, the prehistoric beast will eventually fall. It's not a flashy victory, but it's a certain one. Surveying the battlefield, the hero realizes this war of attrition is far from over, as the ground is littered with arrows while the monster still looms large. Urin actually finds the situation beneficial, relishing the fact that he can drag this excitement out for as long as possible. If his level were higher, he could likely end this in a single strike. But where's the fun in that? He wears a twisted, genuine smile, savoring every second. The thrill is interrupted when the dinosaur suddenly lunges, forcing the boy into a desperate sprint to stay alive. After 3 grueling hours of combat, he decides it's time for a high-stakes gamble. One final move that will either slay the beast or cost him his life. Raising his hands to bait the creature, the dinosaur roars and charges blindly until something strikes it right in the maw. Seizing the moment, the protagonist scales the beast's massive snout to deliver what he hopes is the finishing blow. The monster thrashes wildly to dislodge him, but its open mouth provides the perfect opening for Urin to toss in a handful of bombs. A deafening explosion erupts from within the beast's gullet, shaking the very earth. Agonized and disoriented, the dinosaur rampages across the field, smashing blindly into the surrounding rock formations. As the thick smoke clears, the young man's cries are lost in the chaos, as he loses his grip on the massive jaws and falls. He hits the unforgiving earth hard, sliding across the dirt in a haze of excruciating pain. Urin realizes that a single exchange has shattered his body, leaving him paralyzed on the ground while the dinosaur somehow remains standing. Looking up at the resilient titan, the gravity of his situation sets in. He's out of options and facing a truly desperate end. The dinosaur looms over him, steam billowing from its scorched throat, as the protagonist accepts that he might not walk away from this. Just as he prepares to pivot his strategy, a girl's voice cuts through the tension, asking if he's in need of a helping hand. Startled, he turns toward the voice and the girl gives a reassuring nod, confirming that she's here to turn the tide of battle. Urin asked her how she could stay so calm while facing a dinosaur with such massive, terrifying jaws. Stopping him in his tracks, the girl revealed she had one condition. When he asked what it was, she explained that he needed to sign a contract with her. She promised that her power would ensure his survival in this desperate situation, and better yet, he'd gain the ability to tame a monster as powerful as her. Skeptical, the young man asked why she was so insistent. She simply explained that since they had saved each other's lives, No bond could be stronger. The news left him speechless. He heard her words, but he couldn't quite decipher the mysterious look in the silver fox's eyes. She noted that he clearly valued his own life. After a brief silence, Urin finally nodded, admitting that his life was indeed precious to him. Standing up, she told him she understood and once again offered her hand to finalize the contract. Our protagonist knew he had every reason to accept. He realized that in his current state, defeating a beast that large was an impossible task. He didn't want to die. If he perished now, his unlimited play would end. He had been reborn into this magnificent world, and dying so soon would be a tragedy. Though the situation looked like a total defeat, Urin knew that as long as he survived, the adventure would continue. To him, life was the ultimate priority. A shudder ran through his body as he stood up, but his resolve remained firm. As she extended her hand to help, the choice seemed obvious to everyone, until a smug grin spread across Urin's face. He stood tall and looked at the fox with pure disdain, declaring that he had no interest in her contract. Urin stood there smiling, his answer a cold, definitive refusal that left her stunned. The girl shouted for him to stop being so stubborn, demanding to know why he would reject her help at a time like this. He scoffed, claiming that relying on a little girl would be humiliating. When she took offense, he clarified that while he didn't want to die, he refused to live in shame. Pointing out his obvious contradiction, she poked him in the chest, reminding him that he had just admitted he was powerless to win on his own. She reminded him that this was the moment to make a deal, but Urin simply narrowed his eyes, noting that things had spiraled out of control much sooner than expected. Reaching into his inventory, he sighed with regret. It seemed he had no choice but to lift one of his self-imposed restrictions. The girl watched, utterly baffled by his words, as he reached into his storage and pulled out a mysterious object. He reluctantly admitted that he hated fighting with his right hand, before pulling out a second dagger and finally readying himself for battle. The prehistoric beast lunged with its massive jaws wide, but Urin just stood his ground, spinning his daggers as he lined up his shot. He whispered to himself that it was finally time to get serious. The girl screamed that he still wasn't used to fighting with his offhand, but he just smirked. He explained that using his dominant hand would make the game far too easy, leaving her completely baffled. Urin revealed he was here for a second chance at life, and to master his overwhelming strength, he had placed several harsh restrictions on himself. The first and most grueling rule was to remain at level 1, while the second was to always fight as a lone wolf. The third and final rule was never to use his right hand. Despite the danger, a confident smile played on his lips as he remained locked on his target. He'd been training under these self-imposed shackles since he was a child, just to keep his immense mana in check, which is why his right arm remained sealed for so long. It's why he threw every explosive and wielded every blade with his left hand, only ever using his right for the most dire emergencies. He even drew his bow with his non-dominant side. But now, with both hands finally unleashed, he was ready to show his true potential. He declared the start of the second round, and the hunt began in earnest. The dinosaur glared at him with pure contempt, but Urin felt his body reaching its absolute limit. Even standing was becoming a chore, yet his spirit remained unbroken. Fortunately, Urin possessed a specialized ring that allowed him to manipulate razor-sharp threads. He fired a high-tension wire into a distant tree, slingshotting himself over the dinosaur to close the gap in the blink of an eye. He danced through the air, weaving threads around the beast until he landed squarely on its back, driving his dagger deep into its thick scales. The monster let out a thunderous roar of rage, spinning wildly to shake him off, but the boy just tightened his grip, preparing for the next strike. He maneuvered around the creature's massive tail, using his threads to stay airborne while raining down a barrage of venom-tipped arrows. One by one, the arrows found their mark, sinking deep into the dinosaur's hide and spreading their toxins. To his surprise, wielding his right hand felt perfectly natural, and the fear of losing control vanished as he effortlessly evaded the monster's desperate lunges. Seizing the opening, he prepped a homemade explosive and tossed it with pinpoint accuracy right into the beast's path. As the smoke cleared and the exhausted beast struggled to breathe, Urin appeared like a ghost, plunging his blade into its vitals with surgical precision. The dragon let out one final agonizing roar. Urin just chuckled, noting that his strike was flawless as his twin daggers gleamed in the fading light. A rush of endorphins flooded his system, washing away the pain and making him realize that even his years of self-restraint had served a purpose. The hunt had been a massive success, and Urin looked back on the kill with a sense of grim satisfaction. The girl, watching from the sidelines, was paralyzed with shock, unable to process the carnage she'd just witnessed. She couldn't fathom how a mere level 1 could fight like that, watching him pounce on the prehistoric beast with feral intensity. Using her analysis skill, she confirmed Urin really was only level 1, leaving her staring at him in utter disbelief. He dodged the monster's snapping jaws with surgical precision, landing weak but calculated blows on its most vulnerable pressure points. The massive predator was reduced to a helpless punching bag, to the point where she actually felt a twinge of pity for the beast. She shuddered, grateful she wasn't his enemy, though she couldn't forget the chilling smile he wore during the fight. After a flurry of critical hits, the dinosaur finally collapsed, and Urin landed gracefully behind the fallen titan. The beast let out one final agonizing roar before falling silent as Urin emerged from the settling dust and smoke. Dual-wielding his daggers, he received a level-up notification, but the cursed ring kept him at level 1 while granting him massive SP. He let out a long breath, wiping the grime from his face, while the girl remained frozen, her voice caught in her throat. Suddenly, a terrifying realization dawned on her, causing her entire body to tremble with fear. Urin cursed under his breath, annoyed that a simple dinosaur had actually forced him to work for the kill. She watched him pace around in a rage, frustrated that he was forced to lift one of his self-imposed restrictions just to win. He was visibly fuming, leaving the girl more confused than ever about the mysterious power he possessed. To calm down, he checked his status. He had 232 SP banked, so he shoved the carcass into his inventory to deal with later. Pausing for a moment, he grumbled about how sticky and disgusting the blood was, deciding it was time to head back to town. The girl stood back, whimpering in silence, her eyes locked onto him with a mix of fear and intense curiosity. Urin had no idea what her deal was, but he didn't care enough to ask, turning his back on her to leave. He headed for the village to find a cart and a teleport gate, but the girl continued to trail behind him like a silent shadow. Our hero scaled jagged cliffs and waded through treacherous swamps, yet the mysterious girl remained hot on his trail. Urin wasn't exactly flattered by her dedication, muttering to himself about who this persistent shadow could possibly be. Whirling around, he demanded to know what she wanted, causing the girl to shriek in terror at his sudden, aggressive outburst. She stammered that she just wanted to strike a deal, but Urin, realizing this nightmare wasn't ending, simply bolted into a full sprint. He pushed his pace to lose her, but no matter how fast he ran, she refused to give up the chase. Finally collapsing from exhaustion, Urin accused her of stalking, leaving the confused girl to watch as he desperately tried to crawl away. Fed up, he decided to give her the silent treatment, ignoring both her empty gaze and his fox companion's nagging questions. Realizing he only addressed her with hey or you, the girl finally introduced herself properly. Her name was Fenia. She pleaded for him to wait, but the protagonist ignored her, disappearing into the ominous forest at the mountain's base. Eventually, the pair reached the city, where Fenia found herself mesmerized by the vibrant sights and local fashion. When she affectionately grabbed his arm, Urin immediately shoved her off, though she still insisted he call her by her name. Urin distracted her with a stray kitten, noting her cat-like charms before seizing the chance to ditch her and vanish into the crowd. At the Adventurers Guild, he dropped a massive dinosaur head onto the counter, sending the receptionist into a state of pure horror. She couldn't fathom why he'd bring such a grisly trophy, while Urin wondered why she couldn't just process the loot in peace. He tried to reassure her the beast was dead, but that only made it worse, leaving the poor girl trembling in disbelief. As she explained the guild's strict monitoring of high-level kills, an old man named Jonas overheard the commotion and stepped in. The receptionist reported that a level 1 adventurer had brought in another high-rank monster, leaving Jonas absolutely floored. Jonas recognized the boy immediately, but Urin wasn't thrilled to see him as the old man inspected the massive dinosaur head. When asked how he took down such a beast, Urin played it off as a total fluke, claiming the monster just accidentally fell off a cliff. Jonas screamed in disbelief, refusing to accept that a predator with jaws that size could die in such a pathetic, absurd way. Gritting his teeth, our protagonist realized his old excuses wouldn't work this time. The receptionist pointed directly at a clean knife wound on the beast, proving it had been hunted by a person. The knight concluded that Urin must be the killer, but the hero knew this only made things more complicated. The receptionist argued it was impossible for a level 1 alchemist, drawing the attention of the entire guild. As she prepared to verify his level through the rating system, Jonas began questioning how such a small guy could even transport a monster of that massive size. The girl suggested he might have just scavenged the loot from other adventurers, but the old man countered that while stealing loot is a serious crime, it's certainly not an easy feat. They continued to debate the logistics. The receptionist hadn't heard any reports of stolen kills, yet she had no other explanation. Urin froze, wondering if he was about to be branded a criminal. Deciding it was best to leave before things escalated, he turned to the exit, only to be stopped by someone walking confidently toward him. It was Phinia. Donning her hood, she stood tall in the center of the guild and pointed her finger, declaring that the man who slew the great-jawed dinosaur was standing right there. She claimed to have witnessed the entire fight with her own eyes. As she pointed at Urin, he could only grimace in annoyance while the receptionist questioned the girl's story. The receptionist found the testimony hard to believe, doubting such a small, fragile girl would have even survived in such a high-level monster zone. Still, she couldn't see a reason for the girl to lie. Their debate was interrupted by a booming voice asking for the details of the commotion. It was the guildmaster, a majestic elder with imposing eyebrows and a massive staff. Urin was visibly annoyed, realizing the situation had just become a massive headache. After the receptionist explained the bizarre circumstances, the guildmaster looked on with a somber expression, signaling that he understood the gravity of the situation. He turned to Urin and asked point-blank if he was the one who took down the beast. Without a hint of hesitation, the boy confirmed it, with the massive carcass still looming behind him. Urin realized honesty was his only play after his last cover story was blown, but the guildmaster simply shook his head in disbelief. When the receptionist loudly accused him of being a thief again, the guildmaster silenced her with his staff, reminding her that such accusations require actual proof. He apologized to Urin for the girl's rudeness. She bowed in apology, and the protagonist brushed it off, wanting to move past the drama. This skeptical reaction was exactly what the young man expected. Suddenly, Old Man Jonas appeared behind him once more. With all eyes on the trio, the guildmaster noted that Urin's bluntness was refreshing, but he still demanded to know exactly how he managed to kill such a formidable predator. Surrounded by a curious crowd, the hero knew that a verbal explanation would likely go over their heads. His serious expression shifted as his gaze landed on Phinia. He realized there was a much more effective way to prove his power. His stoic face melted away, replaced by a confident, sly smirk. Urin realized that words were useless. He needed to show them his power in person. The guildmaster agreed, noting that seeing is believing. Our protagonist immediately requested a duel, scanning the room for the perfect opponent to test his mettle. Pointing directly at Jonas, he claimed the man was the perfect fit, having heard he was a seasoned veteran at level 200 or higher. While Urin had experience from his gaming days, he knew fighting a human was a completely different beast than slaying monsters. The guildmaster agreed that this was the ultimate trial for the boy, and asked Jonas if he would accept the challenge. Jonas was hesitant, pointing out the massive level gap and arguing that such a lopsided fight wouldn't accurately measure Urin's skill. With a confident smirk, Urin insisted, reminding everyone he'd already taken down a massive beast far beyond his level. Jonas eventually relented, and as Urin's excitement peaked, the guildmaster officially sanctioned the match. Moments later, the two stood face to face in the courtyard as a massive crowd gathered behind the fence to witness the spectacle. Urin stared down his opponent with burning anticipation, while Jonas calmly told him to strike whenever he was ready. The spectators whispered in confusion, wondering why a complete rookie would ever dream of challenging a titan like Jonas. Word had spread that he'd soloed a legendary monster, and this duel was meant to prove those rumors true since he was only level 1. Most dismissed it as a suicide mission, knowing Jonas was the strongest in the guild, though Phinia watched on with a calm gaze. Urin used his evaluation skill and realized Jonas was even stronger than rumored, nearly level 300 and a master of the greatsword. Instead of being intimidated, Urin's blood began to boil with excitement as he prepped his hands for the opening move. Jonas Langage was a legend in these parts, a man whose reputation as a powerhouse was backed by decades of combat. To him, level was everything, and he viewed mentoring newcomers as a sacred duty bestowed upon the strong. He believed the secret to survival was knowing one's limits, as hunting outside your rank was a one-way ticket to the grave. This was why he was so concerned about Urin. In his eyes, an alchemist was a craftsman, not a frontline warrior. He'd seen many unfortunate classes try to be heroes only to quit the moment they tasted real blood, and he expected Urin to be no different. Because he possesses an inventory skill, most assume he's better suited for merchant work or logistics rather than the life of an adventurer. While Jonas supports the dreams of the younger generation, he doubts Urin's path will be profitable. He hefts his weapon, preparing to strike. Expecting a quick, harmless sparring match, Urin calmly signals for them to begin. The crowd cheers for Jonas, mocking the newcomer to at least try to survive. Since no gold was wagered, the spectators don't consider it gambling, though Jonas still finds it hard to believe the boy actually killed a great-jawed dinosaur. One thing is certain: even if the kid somehow managed to slay a monster, he stands no chance against a veteran like Jonas. Jonas contemplates ending the fight instantly with a simple shove or a quick strike, mentally apologizing to Urin even as the boy lets out a laugh. But in a flash, Urin vanishes, reappearing right beside Jonas with a wide, manic grin and his dagger drawn. His expression is borderline crazed, leaving the spectators in a state of absolute shock. Jonas is left reeling, unable to comprehend how the boy moved so fast. He's baffled by the protagonist's fluid movements. As an alchemist, Urin shouldn't possess such high-level physical capabilities. Suddenly, Jonas spots shimmering spider threads right in front of him. He realizes this is the secret ability allowing the boy to move with such blinding speed. Jonas launches a counterattack, noting that while Urin is fast, his raw power is lacking, certainly not enough to take down a legendary beast. A heavy blow shatters Urin's stance, confirming Jonas's suspicions of his weakness, until the boy's expression shifts, and a massive explosion erupts between them. Jonas realizes it was a hand grenade, a rare tool used by those with low stats to bypass their lack of physical power. Despite the blast, the duel rages on. However, grenades are notoriously difficult to master, requiring intense training and perfect timing to be effective without catching one's own allies in the blast. Seeing Urin's smug grin, Jonas remembers his class. As an alchemist, he can mass-produce these explosives, making this a terrifyingly logical strategy. More explosions rock the arena, which Jonas deflects with his massive sword, but Urin zips past his guard to launch another relentless volley. Jonas realizes that even with his heavy defense, he can't negate the chip damage entirely, though the grenades don't yet pose a fatal threat. Suddenly, Urin's voice rings out from behind him, claiming victory. Jonas realizes the explosions were merely a distraction for the boy's true weapon, his blade. Jonas instinctively triggers his shield dash, manifesting a barrier that slams into Urin and sends him hurtling across the arena into the stone walls. Jonas is actually shaken by the exchange. He had been forced to react with a high-level counter stance just to keep the boy at bay. This skill provides a perfect defense while simultaneously repelling the enemy, making it the most versatile and devastating technique in Jonas's arsenal. However, unleashing such power against a level 1 adventurer was blatant overkill, bordering on a lethal level of excessive force. As the protagonist slumped motionless against the wall, Jonas frantically called out for a healer, fearing he had just taken a life. Suddenly, a chilling laugh erupted from Urin as he stood back up, remarkably claiming that if the fight were any easier, it wouldn't be interesting. Giggling uncontrollably, he demanded to play with the old man some more, even as Jonas warned him that any movement would tear his wounds open. The crowd urged them to stop, declaring Jonas the victor, but Jonas himself was paralyzed by the terrifying aura radiating from the boy. An invisible sense of horror washed over him as he stared into Urin's manic, laughing face, realizing that something about this kid was fundamentally wrong. Jonas ordered the nearby adventurers to restrain the boy, declaring the duel over despite Urin's furious refusal to accept the result. Urin thrashed against the men holding him down, screaming that he hadn't lost yet, leaving Jonas speechless as he signaled for medical aid. Later at the guild, the master advised the protagonist to go home and rest, but the stubborn young man wouldn't hear of it. Once the healer finished their work, Urin grumbled with dissatisfaction, complaining that his body had only just finished warming up. Jonas reminded him that his injuries were too severe to keep fighting, but the boy simply mocked him for being far too soft. While Jonas insisted the duel was merely a test of strength, Urin reflected on his past, knowing these wounds were nothing, before asking when he'd be paid for the monster. The master explained that he needed to consult his superiors, meaning the gold wouldn't be ready until tomorrow. A delay Urin calmly accepted. Jonas offered a reassuring smile, confident that since the loot was legitimate, there would be no issues with the payout. However, everyone was still baffled as to why he remained level 1 after slaying a massive dinosaur, until Urin revealed he used a special item to intentionally suppress his level. When a girl asked why anyone would choose to be weak, Urin simply smiled and replied that combat is far more exhilarating when the odds are against you. His bizarre logic left the guild in a state of total confusion, but the quiet didn't last long before Urin and Phineas were back at each other's throats. Guarding his door, Urin barked at her to stop barging into his room, reiterating that he had no interest in signing contracts or returning to the forest. Yet, no matter how many times he refused her, Phineas remained relentlessly persistent, though Urin seemed entirely unfazed by her pressure. He reiterated his demand that she stop sneaking into his room, but with nowhere else to go, she was determined to stay by his side, no matter what. As neighbors began to gossip about the strange scene, he feared the authorities might get involved, so he reluctantly let her in to talk. Sitting on his bed, he grumpily interrogated her about her obsession with the contract, while she sat opposite him like she was in a job interview. She cheerfully explained that since they had already saved one another, they shared the ultimate bond, and she wanted to remain close to him. He scoffed, reminding her she'd called that monster logic before, but she clarified that it was actually a lesson passed down from her mother. Her mother had taught her that if she ever found an adventurer she truly wished to serve, she should bind herself to them through a contract. The guy stood his ground, insisting he was a solo fighter, and felt they'd reached an impasse that couldn't be solved like a simple party swap in a game. She then offered to stay out of his battles entirely, prompting him to wonder what the point of a non-combatant monster contract even was. She pointed out that he could travel comfortably on her back, saving him the cost of renting a carriage while moving at much higher speeds. She leaned in, asking if that sounded like a fair deal, and he had to admit that ditching the clunky carriages was a tempting prospect. While faster travel meant more efficient hunting, he didn't want to look like he was folding to her demands so easily. He flatly refused the contract, leading to a sudden, accidental headbutt that left them both reeling in shock. Instead of a contract, he offered to hire her as a personal mount, providing a salary, food, and housing in exchange for her transportation services. She agreed to the arrangement for the time being, confident she'd eventually win him over, though he vowed that would never happen. Realizing they were still strangers, she scolded him for his lack of manners and grabbed his hand, demanding a formal introduction. After he finally gave his name, she introduced herself with pride, though the moment quickly devolved back into their usual petty bickering. Later, the guild leader apologized for the bureaucratic delays, leaving the protagonist to browse the quest board for his next move. While he weighed his options for a suitable monster hunt, Fanya asked about their next target, and he confirmed he'd made his choice. Soon they were heading out of the city, and he found that riding on her soft, fluffy back was far more comfortable than any carriage. He hated to admit it, but hiring her was the right call, a sentiment she celebrated by picking up the pace and telling him to hold on tight. She suddenly surged forward, nearly throwing him off her back as he desperately clung to her fur. Terrified of flying off, he begged her to slow down. Instead, she came to a dead stop, launching him headfirst into the dirt. She watched him tumble, wondering how anyone could be this bad at riding. Seeing him faceplant, she suggested taking it easy, but he refused to slow down. To ensure he stayed put this time, he used his abilities to anchor himself firmly to her back. She complained about the sticky sensation of his grip, but he told her to ignore it and keep moving. He was counting on her speed to get them through. Once they arrived, he admitted it was faster than a carriage, though the motion sickness was brutal. Seeing her smug expression only annoyed him, leading to a quick flick to her forehead. She yelped in confusion, asking if the monster truly lived in such a desolate wasteland. He confirmed that according to the guild's intel, this was the place. As they scouted the area, he noted the lack of cover near the massive crater. With almost no trees to hide behind, they would have to be incredibly cautious. Finally, they spotted their target, a steel-scaled dragon. Its massive body was encased in armor that could deflect any blow, though its atrophied wings meant it was grounded. After telling Fanya to memorize its scent, he surprised her by ordering an immediate retreat. She was shocked, questioning why he wasn't charging in like usual. It seemed out of character for him to back down from a challenge. He explained that he never picks a fight he can't win. His survival style was built on meticulous preparation. Rushing in without a plan was a death sentence. He instructed her to return to her fox form so they could reposition. Once they were safe, she asked what their next move would be. His plan was simple: mass-produce explosives. Utilizing the hot rocks he'd collected earlier, they immediately got to work on their arsenal. To maximize efficiency, he dumped his points into his processing skill. Reaching level 5 unlocked a whole new world of crafting possibilities. He could now combine multiple objects into complex machinery. While he used to be limited to hand grenades, he could now manufacture lethal landmines. But he didn't stop there. He pushed his skill to the limit, constructing a massive bomb that was literally the size of a human girl. He was proud of the raw destructive power, but there was one problem. It was way too heavy to throw. Fania sighed, thinking the giant explosive was practically useless. Undeterred, he began brainstorming ways to deploy it while using leftover scraps to craft poison knives and other utility gear. He even managed to whip up a flash grenade for quick escapes. Fania, however, was no longer impressed, finding his obsession with gadgets more amusing than intimidating. As they prepared for their night raid, he asked about her vision. Since she could see perfectly in the dark, he let her take the lead. Fania was confused about their destination, fearing the dangers of the pitch-black night. When she asked why he wouldn't light a torch, Urin explained that the steel dragon was likely asleep. As they moved through the shadows, she clung to his tail to avoid getting separated. He noted that apex predators like dragons are diurnal, while their potential victims remain hidden until nightfall. This allowed him to set his traps in peace. He began burying landmines, warning her to watch her step, to which she silently nodded in agreement. He threw himself into his work while Fania watched from the sidelines, her boredom growing until she eventually asked if this was all he had planned. He assured her there were many more traps to set. Fighting back a yawn, Fania listened as Urin predicted the preparations wouldn't be finished until sunrise. At daybreak, he instructed her to stay back and not interfere with the hunt. She calmly agreed to remain a spectator as he approached the slumbering beast, signaling the start of the operation. Peering through his binoculars, he observed the steel-scale dragon, a creature encased in metallic armor that offers near-impenetrable defense, but makes its massive body slow and cumbersome. Despite having wings, the beast is flightless, making it the ideal target for his strategy. He opened the engagement by firing an arrow directly into the dragon's head. The strike sent the dragon into a rage, its roar echoing across the clearing. Urin grinned, relishing the thrill of the hunt as the monster locked eyes with him and began a thundering pursuit. Fania remained a silent observer while Urin effortlessly evaded the beast's lunges, constantly checking over his shoulder to ensure the dragon stayed on his tail. Once he reached the kill zone, he maneuvered the dragon toward his pre-laid traps, the massive creature charging blindly toward its doom. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the earth. Urin couldn't help but chuckle as the dragon blundered right into the center of his minefield. A beast of that size has no hope of navigating such a dense field. While Urin knew exactly where to step, the dragon struggled to find its footing after the blast. Urin shouted at the beast to keep moving, warning that if it stood still, it would just become a stationary target. He then drew his bow and unleashed a volley of arrows. The relentless fire further enraged the dragon. Even if the raw damage was low, Urin knew from his game knowledge that the beast had a critical weakness to poison. He mockingly warned the dragon away from another area filled with mines, but the beast charged ahead anyway, prompting Urin to make a quick exit. Activating his thread control ring, he blinked out of existence, vanishing right before the dragon could close its jaws. He noted that while the steel-scale dragon lacks sustained speed, its sheer leg strength allows for terrifyingly explosive bursts of movement, but its momentum was its downfall as it plummeted into a hidden pitfall. Seizing the moment, Urin prepared his finishing move, deploying his specialized nets to entangle the beast. He had rigged a massive explosive to the cliffside, timed to drop as the terrain gave way. Knowing the blast radius would be lethal, Urin sprinted for cover behind a nearby rock just as a blinding flash consumed the battlefield. As the smoke cleared, our protagonist emerged from hiding, realizing that if he'd been even a second slower, he would have been blown to pieces. He wondered if the blast had truly connected. That massive bomb had struck the steel-scaled dragon directly, which should have been more than enough to finish her. Suddenly, a piercing scream erupted, so powerful the shockwave shook the very ground beneath him. Yet, seeing the monster still standing, he couldn't help but laugh. Delighted that the beast survived, he admitted he would have been disappointed if it ended so soon, shouting that the real fun was just beginning as he prepared an unforgettable party for her. Upon closer inspection, he noticed her outer shell had been shredded, exposing her vulnerable insides. Her legendary defense was gone now that those iron scales had been stripped away. While his own base attack power was too low to make a dent, he had already littered the area with more mines and giant bombs, waiting to lure her into the next explosion. Effortlessly dodging her strike, he boasted that his thread control ring made evasion a piece of cake, before asking if she really thought staying off the ground would save her from his next gift. The monster lunged again, but he danced around her, meticulously setting the stage for his next strike as he led her toward the next trap in his master plan. But then, the monster came to a sudden halt, catching him off guard. He froze, holding his projectile as he realized the usually ferocious dragoness was doing the unthinkable. She turned her back on him, proving that even the most savage beasts flee when they realize they're outmatched, and began heading straight for the edge of a massive cliff. With a powerful leap, she soared into the abyss, leaving him irritated as he watched her massive body glide through the air, knowing he could never catch her on foot if he went the long way around. Thinking fast, he called out for Finya, and the giant fox girl appeared instantly, asking her master if he had need of her. He explained that the dragon was attempting to escape and asked if she could track its scent, to which she confidently agreed, ready to lead him to their target. They took off at a sprint, with Finya telling him to hop on her back so they could close the distance in record time, and the hunt was back on. As they raced forward, Finya asked if they could actually win, but the protagonist admitted that things had just become significantly more difficult. This surprised her, as he rarely showed such doubt, especially since he seemed to be completely dominating the fight from her perspective. He explained that they were entering territory where he hadn't set any mines or bombs. She suggested simply placing new ones, and he did have the spares to do so. However, he irritably noted that laying fresh traps might be a total waste of time, leaving Finya confused as to why his strategy would suddenly fail. He clarified that his entire plan relied on the monster being the aggressor, using himself as bait to lure her into his preset kill zones. But now that the dragoness had chosen to retreat, his traps were useless. If she kept running, he'd never be able to pin her down. She suggested he use his bow or explosives, but he countered that their damage was negligible. If the hunt wasn't over by sunset, he would fail. Chasing a fleeing enemy would waste precious time, and he knew that failing to slay her before nightfall would result in certain defeat. Fighting in the dark meant zero visibility, and lighting a torch would only serve as a beacon for every other monster in the area. If another predator joined the fray against the steel dragon, he'd be overwhelmed, and he simply didn't have the stamina for a midnight duel. Seeing his predicament, she playfully asked if he was at a dead end, though he only glared back, annoyed by her smug expression. She proposed a contract so they could fight together, but he flatly refused, telling her to keep her eyes on the path ahead and stay out of it. She teased that his stubbornness would make life difficult for his future wife, but their bickering stopped as they finally reached the dragon's lair. She realized that since he was still refusing her help, he must have a secret ace up his sleeve to secure the kill. Dismissing her concerns, he told her to just sit back and watch before stepping out of the shadows to declare that round 2 had officially begun. He lunged at the steel dragon with a mocking shout, immediately drawing the beast's ire in a thunderous growl. Utilizing the threads in his rings for balance, he danced through the air, narrowly dodging the monster's relentless and furious strikes. He realized that while he was safe for now, he wasn't dealing any damage. A head-on collision would be suicide, so he needed a smarter play. To turn the tide, he needed more firepower, so he invested his special points into a new skill: physical critical attack. This ability grants a chance to massively boost physical damage, a skill usually reserved for swordsmen, who can unlock it for a mere 2 points. However, as an alchemist, the cost was a staggering 28 points, but he didn't hesitate as he closed the distance with the beast. Eager to test his new investment, he landed a swift strike that forced a pained roar from the dragon, confirming the critical hit had landed. Even so, the monster recovered quickly. Urin realized that since his base stats were low, even a critical hit wouldn't be enough to end this. With a manic grin, he downed a bottle of lethal poison to trigger a poisoned state, allowing him to unlock the stinging poison blade skill. This unique ability can only be activated while the user is poisoned, significantly boosting the potency of every critical hit he lands. He then purchased Pyre of Destiny, which doubles critical damage when his health drops below 30%, stacking both skills for a devastating combo. In other words, Their synergy provides a massive power spike. However, a sharp sting in his throat reminded him that such strength comes with agonizing drawbacks. Chuckling, he realized his health would soon plummet below the threshold, and that's when the real fun would start. He lunged at the beast again, but his strike missed. It was a desperate gamble. Would he land a critical hit before his HP hit 0? He weighed his narrow odds, wondering which would give out first, the monster or his own life. He unleashed a flurry of strikes, but the monster evaded every blow, standing its ground and letting out a deafening roar. Finally, his dagger found its mark. The protagonist felt the impact connect, and the massive creature began to tremble under the force of the successful hit. With a thunderous crash, the beast collapsed. Notifications flooded his vision, granting him massive experience, yet the cursed ring kept his level stubbornly locked at 1. Fania rushed over, checking on him with feigned calm. He gasped that he was far from okay. If the poison wasn't neutralized soon, he was a dead man. She couldn't believe he'd been reckless enough to get poisoned again. Too weak to move, he signaled toward his inventory, where Fania spotted the potion he had brewed. His hands shook too violently to hold the vial, so he pleaded for her help. Nodding, she shifted into her human form and gently began to pour the medicine down his throat. A silence fell over the clearing as the empty bottle rolled away. With the monster's carcass nearby, Fania watched over him, asking softly if the danger had passed. Seeing the sheer terror in her eyes, he realized she was more shaken than he was. He managed a weak reassurance before the world went black. When he finally came to, he was relieved to find himself still breathing. Before he could even sit up, a tearful Fania threw herself into his arms, sobbing about how worried she was. He bluntly told her to back off, claiming he never asked for her concern. Offended by his icy demeanor, she snapped back, hurt that her genuine fear was being brushed aside. She argued that their fates were now intertwined, making his safety her business, though he couldn't recall ever agreeing to such a sentimental bond. She playfully teased that he'd change his tune soon enough, though he retorted that he'd only rely on her if the world itself turned upside down. Scanning his surroundings, he realized they were back in the familiar safety of the cave they had used before. It was a secure hideout, free from wandering predators. Fania proudly added that she'd brought a gift back for him, demanding he show some gratitude for her hard work. She led him outside to the monster's carcass, which she had dragged back for him to harvest. He stared in awe, thankful that scavengers hadn't gotten to it first. He reached out and patted her head, offering a sincere thank you. The sudden praise caught her off guard, causing a deep blush to creep across her face. She shoved his hand away, shouting at him not to treat her like a child, to which he simply smirked, noting that she certainly acted like one. She snapped, annoyed that she looked like a child despite being far older than him. He simply figured that since she was a monster, the gap between her age and appearance was only natural. He offered a quick apology for his tactless remark, but then couldn't help himself and asked for her actual age. This only made her even more flustered. She turned away in a huff, irritated that he'd even ask. Seeing her pout, he reached out and playfully grabbed her head. He teased her, saying she wasn't a girl because she wasn't human, while she shrieked for him to stop before he completely ruined her hair. Once they arrived at the guild, the leader apologized, explaining that a sudden mess prevented them from exchanging his loot for cash. The protagonist was stunned by the failure. Because he was only level 1, he was initially suspected of theft, but the duel had confirmed his true power. Even so, the lingering suspicion left him feeling incredibly frustrated. He pointed out that this was taking far too long, especially since they promised everything would be ready today. The old man could do nothing but apologize again. Then the guild leader asked a pointed question. What exactly was his connection to Count Mercadel? He knew the Count was his father, but since he'd been cast out of the family, he didn't want to believe that relationship still held any weight. He claimed he had no such ties, but the old man revealed that the Count strongly suspected him of something. It was clear his father was pulling strings from the shadows. He remembered the guild leader mentioning consulting superiors, and it was obvious his father was one of them. This family pressure was making everything a massive headache. Urin accepted the delay, but asked if the guild could at least store the monster for safekeeping until the exchange could officially proceed. The guildmaster agreed and summoned Elena to handle the paperwork, which was how our hero finally learned her name. The chief told her to register a new monster, and Elena enthusiastically boasted that nothing he brought could possibly surprise her this time. Urin could only look away, wondering why she was so confident. But when he revealed the steel-scale dragon, she let out a scream louder than any before. She couldn't fathom how a level 1 could take down such a beast. She immediately accused him of stealing it, giving him a heavy sense of déjà vu, until the old man whacked her with his staff for making baseless accusations. While the chief insisted on taking it, Elena protested that they were out of room, recalling Jonas's warnings about how difficult these monsters were to handle. As they left, the boy realized the chaos he was causing. However, his main concern was his father. If the Count kept interfering, things would get ugly. Later, sitting on his bed, the protagonist sighed. If he couldn't turn his loot into gold, he was going to be in serious financial trouble. Fania noticed his dark mood and asked what was wrong. It was then he realized he still hadn't told her the truth about why he was exiled. He explained that his father seemed intent on causing him harm. Tearfully, she acknowledged the hardships he'd endured, leaving him stunned by her genuine empathy. She noted how painful his exile must be, but he disagreed. On the contrary, he felt liberated, finally free to live life on his own terms. Shocked, she remarked on his eccentric nature, yet worried for his future. When she asked about his plans, he simply leaned back and indifferently suggested that time would eventually settle everything. Elsewhere, a stunned nobleman demanded confirmation. Had Urin really brought another high-level monster to the guild? He barked for evidence of his son's foul play, but when none was found, he slammed his fist down, making his subordinates tremble in fear. The father roared that Urin was a mere alchemist, incapable of hunting such beasts. Convinced there was a trick, he ordered a full investigation, and his servant bowed in compliance. Sinking back into his chair with a heavy sigh, he heard a knock. Emmanuel entered with news, prompting the father to ask for an update. The young man gleefully announced another level up. His father beamed with pride, knowing this success was inevitable given the elite resources he'd provided from the start. He'd been paired with elite adventurers to hunt high-level prey, a luxury, as top-tier warriors usually have no interest in babysitting the weak. However, massive rewards can buy any service, a training method exclusive to the wealthy elite. Emmanuel then mentioned rumors that Urin was hiding a secret. The father dismissed the concern as trivial, ordering his son to focus on his own growth as the future clan head. Overjoyed, the boy tearfully vowed to do just that. After he left, the man growled that Urin was still a thorn in his side even after exile, vowing to expose his dirty deeds soon enough. Back at the guild, our protagonist sat gloomily before his meal while the surrounding adventurers chatted away in high spirits. Opposite him, Fania devoured her food with pure delight. When he urged her to slow down, she enthusiastically explained she'd never tasted anything so delicious. Urin gestured for her to stop talking with her mouth full, finding it a bit unsightly. Realizing her lack of manners, she quickly covered her mouth and apologized. He realized that for someone who had lived as a beast, a properly cooked meal was likely a luxury she'd never known. Fania asked about their next target, but he admitted he was unsure, since the guild refused to process any of his kills. He mused that to make ends meet, they might need to head into a dungeon. Fania's eyes lit up as she eagerly embraced the idea. Unfortunately, there were no dungeons nearby, though he recalled one in a neighboring town. When she asked about the distance, he noted it would be a breeze with her help. He reasoned that his father's reach wouldn't extend that far, allowing them to trade freely. Suddenly, he noticed the glass on the table beginning to vibrate. Panic gripped the room as the ground began to tremble. Fania shrieked in confusion while our protagonist tried to keep her calm, but the shaking only intensified, toppling glasses and drenching the table. Apparently, earthquakes are a rarity in this world. While the MC scanned his surroundings, Fania hurriedly finished her meal, though he grumbled that the commotion outside was definitely tied to the tremors. A piercing scream echoed through the air. A new dungeon had manifested. The boy bolted into the street, urging Fania to keep up as they pushed through the massive crowd that had already gathered. As he ran, he realized the tremors were the result of a fresh dungeon being born. Fania, however, struggled to keep pace, complaining that it's hard to sprint on a full stomach. They soon reached the site, a jagged entrance buried among fallen columns and shattered stone. Overjoyed, he charged toward the opening while Fania fought her way through the throng of people. His excitement got the better of him, though, as he slammed right into Jonas and tumbled backward onto the dirt. Jonas demanded to know what he was doing, and the boy shot back that he wanted to explore. Without hesitation, Jonas shut him down, stating that the area was strictly off-limits. He explained that the dungeon's threat level was still a mystery, and they couldn't just let civilians wander into a potential death trap. To our protagonist, the danger only made it more enticing. Undeterred, he asked exactly what it would take to get past the perimeter. Jonas planned to send a research team the following morning, and if the area was deemed safe, he'd consider it. The MC played along, nodding in feigned understanding. He recalled how games often gated weak players behind level requirements. He could already picture himself being rejected and stuck on the sidelines. Sure, an easy dungeon might be safer, but that's boring. He craved the raw adrenaline that only comes from stepping into the unknown. The mystery of what monsters lurked inside made his blood pump. If he wanted in, he'd have to find a way to join that research squad. When he asked to join the group, Jonas laughed him off, telling the newbie that he'd only be a liability and to stop pushing his luck. After a playful smack to the head, Jonas told him that if he begged hard enough tomorrow, he might just let him tag along. Seeing no point in arguing further, the MC thanked him and retreated. A brand new dungeon was the ultimate opportunity, and he needed to spend the night preparing for whatever lay ahead. Fania shifted into her massive fox form, and the boy hopped onto her back as they sped into the forest. Their mission: gather as many medicinal herbs as possible. By the end of the day, the boy had a massive haul, while a dejected Fania held only a pathetic handful of leaves. She grumbled about his luck, but he reminded her that he had the assessment skill, which acted like a cheat code for finding the best plants. He was actually impressed she found anything at all without a skill, but Fania just sighed, determined to be even more useful to him. Gently stroking her head, he tells her that her wish alone is enough, though he can't help but remember how she'd pulled away from his touch just moments ago. Skeptical of his sudden warmth, she asks if he's been replaced by an imposter, but he dismisses the accusation, claiming he's always this kind and urging her to stand tall. When he asks for her honest opinion of him, she doesn't hold back, calling him a battle-hungry madman, a berserker, though he jokes that those descriptions are all essentially the same thing. Urin admits that while he lives for the thrill of combat, he still possesses a hidden kindness, prompting him to change the subject and ask for her help brewing a massive batch of healing potions. Surveying the mountain of ingredients, she wonders why he needs so many when he never uses them in a fight, even as he begins the meticulous crafting process. He explains that healing isn't instantaneous, and with his paper-thin defense, standard potions are practically useless during the heat of a real battle. He adds that even if a potion restores him to full health, his low base HP means he'd still be taken out in a single hit, making them a waste of time mid-combat. Besides, the taste makes him nauseous, so when she asks why he's making a surplus, he simply smiles and tells her it's a surprise for later. Over at the guild, the atmosphere is electric as adventurers sharpen their blades and discuss the latest rumors just as our protagonist and Fania arrive. The guildmaster calls the meeting to order, announcing the formation of an investigation team to explore a mysterious new dungeon that's appeared in the city. With the difficulty and monster types completely unknown, he stresses that they'll need every ounce of strength the elite adventurers can provide to survive. As the room erupts with excitement, the call for volunteers goes out, and the protagonist raises his hand without a second thought. However, the master drops a bombshell. Only rank C adventurers at level 100 or higher can apply, leaving our hero feeling like the guild is mocking his progress. But he isn't about to let a little thing like requirements stop him, confidently approaching the guildmaster to demand a spot on the research team. The stressed official tries to turn him away, reiterating that the dangers of an unknown dungeon are far too great for anyone under level 100 to participate. Refusing to back down, the protagonist reveals his trump card, presenting a massive, shimmering tower of high-grade potions that leaves the room speechless. The crowd goes wild, realizing these are advanced healing potions, items so valuable their price rivals the materials dropped by level 100 monsters. These are incredibly rare because most alchemists are too weak in combat to ever survive long enough to earn the skill points needed for high-level crafting. Since few can reach mixing level 4, these potions are almost never seen on the open market, making them the ultimate bargaining chip for his entry. The adventurers are suddenly convinced that with these supplies, the dungeon will be a walk in the park, showering the low-level hero with newfound respect. Jiren accepted, but with one condition. He demanded a spot on the investigation team. The guildmaster hesitated, but Jonas stepped in, vouching for the boy's combat prowess despite his lowly level 1 status. Jonas argued that his supply of top-tier potions made him the ultimate healer, much to Jiren's annoyance. He appreciated the praise but craved the front lines where the real action was. Still, the leaders officially welcomed him aboard. The crew agreed that if Jonas trusted him, he'd be a valuable asset to keep them alive, so they welcomed him without further protest. With the decision finalized, the expedition was set. Even the master had to concede and let the young man join the raid. Jonas congratulated Jiren on his luck, though the protagonist was still sulking about being relegated to a support role. Jonas expected big things from him, and Jiren confidently replied that he planned to exceed those expectations from the very start. Suddenly, Fania chimed in, demanding to join the expedition, though the others just saw her as a child who should stay home. Offended, she snapped back that she was actually older than all of them combined, leaving Jonas and Jiren exhausted by the drama. Jiren quickly claimed she was his tamed monster, sparking immediate confusion and skepticism from a bewildered Jonas. Though the contract wasn't official yet, Jiren bluffed that her power was real, claiming she was well over level 100. Jonas remained skeptical of such a claim until Alina stepped forward, using her skills to verify the girl's true level. To her shock, Alina confirmed the massive level. While Fania celebrated, Jiren teased that he'd rather leave her behind. She threw a tantrum, insisting their destinies were intertwined, until Jiren finally relented and let her tag along. The onlookers were green with envy over their relationship, while Jiren just wanted to get moving and the others remained baffled. With the team finally assembled, Jonas gave the signal, and the warriors prepared to invade the mysterious dungeon. The party marched forward, with Jiren and Fania bringing up the rear as they crossed the threshold into the unknown. Based on his gaming knowledge, Jiren knew these dungeons were unpredictable, and he was eager to see what challenges awaited. But the moment he stepped inside, he was suddenly alone. The path behind him had vanished, trapping him in a one-way labyrinth. Usually, backtracking works, but not here. After testing the walls, he realizes they're solid. His only options are to slay the boss or find a hidden exit portal. The first option is a dungeon staple, but the second is a gamble. Worse yet, every other adventurer has completely vanished. There were 20 of them, but this place reminds him of a notorious party destroyer dungeon from the game that scatters players to different sectors. If they landed together, they might survive, but if they're isolated, they're on their own. He pauses, listening to the echoes of the abyss. Instead of fear, he feels a surge of excitement. Readying his blade, he welcomes the surprises of the unknown as a pack of goblins appears ahead. He tears through the monsters with clinical precision. They barely have time to shriek before they're wiped from existence. Checking his map, he loots a basic goblin club. The enemies are predictable, suggesting this dungeon's difficulty is surprisingly low. Perhaps it's scaled down for a solo run. He spots a staircase and knows the rule. The deeper you go, the deadlier the monsters, and the boss awaits at the bottom. While other adventurers might be nearby, he's done wasting time on weaklings and begins his descent. On the next level, he's greeted by level 5 wolves, vicious, four-legged predators that immediately snap their jaws at him. They're no tougher than the goblins. The dungeon is a breeze, provided you don't mind the crushing loneliness. He readies his weapon once more. He blitzes through the pack, cutting them down. Solo runs are his specialty, but a support class like a healer wouldn't stand a chance here. By the 5th floor, the challenge ramps up slightly as he faces a level 25 beast. As it lunges, he effortlessly vaults onto the ceiling above it. He drops down, delivering a lethal, poisonous combo that ends the fight instantly. He's craving a real challenge as he reaches the next staircase. A hulking werewolf stands in his path, far deadlier than a standard wolf. Yet, after slaying a level 532 steel-scaled dragon, this feels like child's play. Despite the gap in power, he refuses to get complacent. He tosses a flashbang, blinding the werewolves with a searing burst of light. While they're disoriented, he follows up with a well-placed grenade before finishing the survivors with his poisoned daggers. Another level-up notification pops up, but the cursed bracelet keeps his stats locked at level 1. Urin scoffs at the fallen beast. Unimpressed, he mops up the remaining stragglers, desperate for a worthy opponent. Eventually, he discovers a strange, shimmering door. It's a swirling wormhole that hides whatever lies beyond. Wondering if a boss is waiting on the other side, he steps through the portal. Inside, he's greeted by Fanya, who rushes toward him, crying out about how much she missed him. Urin remains indifferent, prompting her to complain that he should act more touched by their heartfelt reunion, but he's still trying to process the situation. When she asks if he's even happy to see her, he gives a lackluster yes that clearly doesn't satisfy her. Ignoring her pouting, the protagonist looks around and asks for their current location. Urin realizes they're still in the dungeon, and Fanya explains that this is a designated rally point. Suddenly, a seasoned adventurer approaches, admitting he never expected a low-level guy like him to make it this far. Urin casually replies that the monsters were all weaklings. The man laughs it off, noting that if anyone else had said that, he might believe them. But coming from a level 1, it sounds like a total bluff. Curious, the protagonist asks about the room's purpose. The man explains that while the dungeon forces everyone to clear floors solo, it eventually funnels all survivors here, which is why they call it the rally point. Noticing the lack of other warriors, Urin questions where everyone went. The man explains they've already split into 2 groups, each taking one of the 2 passages leading out of the hall. They assume one gate leads to the exit and the other to the boss room. When Urin asks if he's the last to arrive, the man says a few are still missing and asks how many floors he cleared. Urin casually mentions he finished 10. The adventurer is stunned, realizing the number of levels varies for each person. Fanya is equally surprised, revealing she only had to clear 3 floors to reach this point. The man reveals he cleared 6 levels, making Urin's 10 floors an incredible feat. Our protagonist realizes that with so many extra challenges to overcome, it's no wonder he arrived late. The man admits he'd written Urin off for dead, assuming a level 1 wouldn't survive the gauntlet. Urin isn't surprised. He knows exactly how weak he appears to others. The adventurer adds that Fanya was the only one who kept the faith, insisting he wouldn't die in a place like this. He then asks Urin what his next move will be. He explains that he's waiting for scouts to return from the gates to see which path is which. Urin realizes that once the scouts report back, the choice between the exit and the boss will be clear. The adventurer suggests Urin stay put, but the boy declines, choosing to press on immediately. Even when warned that the next room might be the boss's lair, Urin simply smiles. That's exactly where he wants to go. To him, a powerful dungeon boss isn't a threat, it's a prize. Seeing his determination, Fanya decides she's coming along for the ride. The man doesn't stop them, but he asks for a favor. Leave some healing potions for the injured adventurers expected to arrive. Urin agrees, leaving behind a massive stockpile of supplies for the wounded. The man is overjoyed by the generous gift. Meanwhile, the protagonist stands before the 2 gates, weighing his 50-50 odds of finding the boss or the exit. Without a moment's hesitation, he picks a tunnel, betting on it leading straight to the boss. Fanya follows close behind, trusting his instincts completely. Elsewhere, we see Jonas struggling after barely clearing 5 levels. As a support class seeker, this solo trial was a nightmare, but he finally reaches the passage and wonders what awaits him. Inside the rally point, he finds the other adventurers who check on his condition. They immediately begin regrouping and tending to their various wounds. After a brief rest, one of them suggests they move out, as there's no point in waiting for any more stragglers. Jonas silently agrees, and the group prepares for the final stretch. He explained that one gate leads to freedom while the other leads to the boss, but staying put simply isn't an option. When asked if they should stick together, Jonas agrees it's safer for a boss fight, but there's a tactical catch. If they find the exit, they're home free, but if they split up, at least one group can report the gate's location to the guild. Splitting guarantees someone survives to warn the guild, even if it means having their strength against a potential boss. All eyes turn to Jonas for the final decision, and he ultimately decides that dividing the party is their best bet. Prioritizing the guild's intel, he admits that while sticking together is ideal, they've simply run out of time. They leave rations behind for any stragglers, but Fanya surprises everyone by announcing she's staying behind as well. Jonas warns her that Urin is likely dead, doubting a level 1 could survive this far. Yet the girl remains completely unfazed. She stands her ground as the others divide and disappear into the dark corridors, their expressions heavy with dread. It was a 50-50 gamble, and Jonas lost. Standing before them is a massive goblin king crowned in jagged steel. The monarch is a mountain of muscle wielding a colossal club, and Jonas quickly realizes he's in way over his head. At level 978, this monster is leagues beyond anything they've faced, shattering the complacency Jonas had built up. He realized his fatal error. He judged the dungeon's difficulty based on his own easy path, ignoring those who had it much harder. Swallowing his fear, he rallies his team, shouting that they can still win if they coordinate their attacks perfectly. With 8 warriors standing together, they still have a fighting chance, and Jonas leads the charge with a deafening roar. He throws himself into the fray to draw the boss's aggro, but the sheer force of the king's strike nearly breaks him. Sparks erupt as steel meets stone, but despite his best efforts, Jonas fails to dodge a devastating swing from the club. The impact sends him crashing into a wall, disarming him as the monster lets out a bone-chilling, triumphant howl. Just as the king prepares the finishing blow, Bob and John leap forward, blocking the massive weapon with their own. The 2 veterans refuse to let him die today, and a grateful Jonas realizes that with allies like these, they might just survive. Jonas commanded the mages and archers to maintain distance and provide cover fire. With grim determination, the entire squad prepared for a coordinated assault. Bracing behind their shields to deflect the beast's heavy strikes, they countered with precise thrusts until the massive boss finally began to stagger. Jonas channeled every ounce of strength into his frame, his veins bulging as he coiled his muscles to deliver a final, killing blow. He unleashed a devastating strike, attempting to cleave the monster apart while the rest of the adventurers swarmed in to finish the job. As the titan collapsed, cheers erupted through the chamber. Believing the dungeon cleared, they hailed Jonas as a hero, until a sudden, unexplained cut opened on his cheek. Suddenly, Bob collapsed, followed by the rest of the squad as they were pelted by stones. To Jonas's horror, the boss stood completely unscathed, leaving him baffled as his allies dropped like flies. Realizing the boss was firing high-speed projectiles, Jonas screamed for a retreat, but the relentless barrage continued to tear through his ranks. The accuracy was terrifying. It seemed impossible that elite, seasoned veterans were being dismantled by what looked like simple, ordinary missiles. Refusing to back down, Jonas roared in defiance and swung his massive claymore with desperate, localized fury. But the boss's counter was instantaneous, sending Jonas hurtling into the stone wall with enough force to shatter the masonry. Fighting to stay conscious, he knew that as long as he could breathe, he could fight. Above him, the boss stood looming, its mocking laughter echoing through the room. Suddenly, a casual voice asked if the show had finally started. Jonas looked up in disbelief to see the protagonist standing there, completely out of place. Wearing a confident smirk, the young man declared he was here to handle the boss, while the girl beside him remained eerily composed. She checked on Jonas, who noted he felt lucky to be breathing. She reassured him that while the squad was down, they were all still clinging to life. Pulling a stash of potions from his inventory, the boy tasked the girl with healing the fallen before turning his attention toward the monster. Gazing at the grinning boss, he smiled, noting that this serious opponent might actually be fun. With chilling playfulness, he invited the beast to a duel. Investing his points, he instantly unlocked and boosted the parry skill to level 4. He met the boss's next strike head-on, though his blade shattered instantly under the pressure. Parry is a high-level technique designed to deflect physical force, but it's notoriously expensive for non-warrior classes. Now weaponless, he was forced to evade the monster's reach. A level 4 parry should have been enough to redirect the Goblin King's power, but even with perfect timing, his fragile knife couldn't withstand the impact. As the boss gave chase with a booming laugh, the protagonist lamented that while knives are notoriously brittle, having his weapon disintegrate was still a major annoyance. Forced to abandon his broken blades, he draws the steel dragon dagger just as the boss lunges, effortlessly parrying every frantic strike. He originally forged this weapon from dragon scales as a backup, and it proves its worth immediately as he hurls the blade directly at the berserk monster. Drawing on his knowledge of the Goblin King's mechanics, he unleashes a tactical barrage of arrows and flash grenades, rattling the bridge as he closes the gap. With a swift item swap, he retrieves his dagger and plunges it into the goblin's eyes, ignoring its agonized roars as he readies one final explosive. The point-blank blast rocks the beast's skull, sending its massive frame trembling before it finally collapses into the dirt. Standing tall amidst the rising smoke, our hero wears a confident smirk while Jonas watches from the sidelines, completely stunned by the display.